You know what's interesting about avoidance? They walk away. They pull back, they convince themselves that leaving is the right choice. They do it with certainty in their voice, and maybe even coldness in their actions. But here's the truth: no one talks about avoidance regret leaving more often than you think. And when that regret hits, it's powerful, it's heavy, and it brings them back knocking on your door. Sometimes literally, sometimes emotionally, sometimes silently, just watching from a distance. So when does this regret set in? It doesn't happen right away. At first, they feel relief. Space feels safe, independence feels powerful. And they think they've made the smartest choice. But then reality sets in. They start to notice the silence. They notice the absence of your energy, your laughter, your presence. Avoidants live in a cycle. They crave closeness. They get scared of it. They push it away. And then once it's gone, they crave it all over again. That's when regret begins to gnaw at them. And why do they return? Because regret isn't just about missing you. It's about realizing what they lost when they thought they were gaining freedom. They remember your support, the way you understood them when they couldn't even understand themselves, the way you made them feel grounded in moments of chaos. They return when they realize no one else connects with them at that depth, when casual connections don't fill the void, and when independence feels more like loneliness than freedom. Here's the twist: when avoidants regret, they don't come back charging with apologies. They come back carefully, quietly, often testing the waters. It's not because they don't care. It's because vulnerability terrifies them. So if they return, it's not random. It's because you left an impact strong enough to shake the walls they've built. And that impact, it doesn't fade. Now, I need you to hear this clearly. Their return doesn't mean you're meant to take them back. Their regret isn't your responsibility to heal. Sometimes their return is your moment of closure, your reminder that you were never the problem. Sometimes it's the universe showing you that you were always enough, and they needed time to see it. But sometimes, if the timing is right, if growth has happened, regret can open the door to something real, something deeper, something worth rebuilding. So when avoidants regret leaving, and when they come back, the choice isn't theirs, it's yours. Because regret may bring them back, but wisdom keeps you in control of how the story ends. When someone with avoidant tendencies leaves a relationship, they often walk away with an incredible sense of relief. To them, stepping back feels like regaining freedom, breathing room, and independence. In those first moments, they may convince themselves that leaving was the best decision they could have made. They tell themselves they've escaped pressure, intensity, or vulnerability, and in that space they feel calm, maybe even empowered. But here's the reality: that relief is temporary. It doesn't last, because avoidance is never about a lack of care, it's about fear. The fear of intimacy, of being consumed, of not knowing how to handle closeness. And once they walk away from you, once the quiet settles in, regret has a way of slowly creeping in, often without them even realizing it at first. At the beginning, silence feels safe to an avoidant. The absence of expectations or emotional connection can feel like a victory. They dive into distractions, work, hobbies, friendships, anything to fill the gap. They remind themselves they're independent, strong, and fine on their own. But as the days stretch on, the silence they once craved begins to shift in tone. It stops sounding like peace and starts sounding like emptiness. What once felt like freedom starts to reveal itself as loneliness. This is the first crack where regret begins to seep in. Because in pushing you away, they've also pushed away the warmth, energy, and comfort that your presence brought into their life. Avoidants don't immediately recognize this regret. They're not sitting there with a sudden lightning bolt moment of realization. Instead, it builds slowly. They notice small things: how no one else listens the way you did, how laughter doesn't feel as genuine with others, how their space feels bigger but colder without you in it. They might remember the way you showed patience during their moments of withdrawal, the way you offered love without demanding perfection, or the way you made them feel grounded when their own emotions felt confusing. These memories don't hit all at once. They slip in quietly, sometimes when they're least expecting it. And with every memory, the absence of you becomes harder to ignore. The regret deepens when they realize the silence isn't just the absence of noise, it's the absence of connection. This is the part that hurts them most, because while avoidants often fear being overwhelmed by intimacy, they also crave it deeply. It's part of the cycle they live in. They want closeness, they push it away, and then they ache for it again once it's gone. In losing you, they've lost not just a partner but a sense of safety, understanding, and belonging that doesn't come around often. They thought independence was what they needed most, but without you, independence feels hollow. So while at first an avoidant feels relief when they walk away, it is only a temporary illusion. In time, the silence grows too heavy, the absence too obvious, and the regret too strong to ignore. That's when the weight of what they've lost begins to sink in, and suddenly, the decision that once felt like freedom now feels like one of the biggest mistakes they've ever made. When avoidants step away from a relationship, they often believe that what they are gaining is freedom. To them, distance feels like an escape from vulnerability, obligations, and emotional intensity. In the beginning, this illusion of freedom brings a kind of satisfaction. They might tell themselves that they can now focus on their own life, their own space, their independence, without having to worry about someone else's needs or emotions. It feels like a victory, as if they've outsmarted the weight of intimacy by choosing solitude. But as time passes, that so-called freedom reveals its cracks. They start to realize that freedom without connection doesn't actually feel fulfilling. It doesn't replace the deep bond they once shared, and it doesn't soothe the quiet ache of losing someone who truly mattered. At first, the excitement of doing whatever they want whenever they want may feel exhilarating. They might dive into work, travel, hobbies, or even new relationships, convincing themselves that they are thriving on their own. But what they don't anticipate is the emptiness that slowly creeps in. No matter how much they try to distract themselves, there comes a moment when they recognize that independence does not fill the space where intimacy used to live. The little things become glaringly obvious. The late-night conversations, the laughter over inside jokes, the comfort of being understood without having to explain. These are not replaced by freedom, because freedom on its own is neutral. It's the connection that gives life warmth, meaning, and color. What makes regret even more powerful for avoidance is that they tend to notice it when it's too late. At first, they don't miss you because they're enjoying the relief of distance. But slowly, they start to compare their current state with what they had before. Casual encounters lack depth. New connections might seem fun at first but don't carry the same resonance. Even solitude, which once felt empowering, becomes heavy. They find themselves remembering how safe it felt to be around you, how much lighter life felt when they didn't have to face everything alone. In those quiet moments, they realize that the very thing they thought they were escaping, emotional closeness, was actually what gave them a sense of belonging and security. The regret doesn't just come from missing your presence, it comes from realizing that freedom was never the real solution to their discomfort. They left because closeness felt overwhelming, but distance exposes them to a different kind of pain, loneliness. And loneliness has a way of stripping away all illusions. The avoidant begins to see that what they thought was suffocating was actually rare, valuable, and deeply grounding. That's why their regret feels so sharp. It's not only about losing you, it's about realizing they gave up something irreplaceable for the sake of an illusion. In the end, what they discover is that independence and freedom are not substitutes for love and connection. True freedom doesn't mean running away from intimacy. It means having someone who accepts you fully and still allows you to be yourself. And when avoidants realize that, their regret becomes unavoidable, because nothing they chase in the name of freedom can ever replace the connection they lost. When avoidants return after leaving, they rarely do it with bold declarations or grand gestures. Instead, they come back slowly, carefully, often in subtle ways that almost feel unnoticeable at first. They might send a casual message, like checking in about something insignificant, or they might like an old photo on social media, or they might bring up a memory that only the two of you shared. These quiet signals aren't random. They're a way of testing the waters without fully exposing themselves. Avoidants have a complicated relationship with vulnerability. On one hand, they long for closeness, connection, and the comfort of being known deeply. On the other hand, they fear the very same closeness because it makes them feel exposed, dependent, or out of control. This is why their way of returning is cautious, almost hesitant, and not the direct approach that many people expect. Vulnerability feels dangerous to avoidants. It's not that they don't care, it's that caring so deeply frightens them. To them, opening up completely can feel like giving away power, and that thought alone can trigger anxiety. So, when regret pulls them back toward you, they don't rush in with full honesty. Instead, they inch closer in ways that protect their pride and guard their emotions. This is why many people who've been with avoidants describe their return as confusing. It feels inconsistent. One moment they're reaching out, the next moment they're distant again. What's happening here is an inner battle. Part of them wants to reconnect because they miss what they had, but another part is terrified of repeating the cycle of vulnerability and closeness that originally scared them. When they test the waters, what they're really doing is checking to see if the door is still open without having to risk rejection. They don't come back loudly because rejection, to them, feels unbearable. So instead, they use cautious signals, waiting for you to respond first, hoping you'll show them it's safe to come closer. This is why when avoidants return, it can feel like they're circling around the connection instead of diving straight back into it. They may seem hesitant, but the hesitation doesn't mean they don't care. It means they care so much that the possibility of being vulnerable again feels overwhelming. What's important to understand is that their quiet return is actually proof of how much impact you've had on them. They don't take those small steps unless they feel drawn back to the connection. Even in their fear, the pull towards you is strong enough to break through the walls they've built. It's their way of saying, "I miss you," without having to say it out loud. It's their way of admitting regret without putting their heart completely on display. So, when avoidants return in these quiet, cautious ways, it's not about lack of care. In fact, it's the opposite. Their carefulness shows how much they're wrestling with their own fear of vulnerability. Their return, no matter how subtle, is proof that your presence left an imprint too powerful to ignore, one that lingers long after they tried to walk away. When an avoidant returns after leaving, it is easy to assume that their intention is always reconciliation. But that is not always the case. Sometimes their reappearance is about closure more than it is about reigniting a relationship. For many avoidants, the regret they feel after walking away isn't just tied to missing you, it's tied to realizing that they may have left something unresolved. They may come back to ease the weight of unfinished business, to test whether the connection still exists, or to remind themselves that what you had was real. In those moments, their presence isn't necessarily a plea to start over, but rather an attempt to find peace with the decision they once made. For you, this can become a powerful reminder that you were never the problem, and that their regret is a reflection of their own inner conflict rather than a judgment of your worth. Closure can show up in many different ways. Sometimes it looks like a simple conversation where they acknowledge what you meant to them. Other times it can be more subtle, like them reaching out, reminiscing about the past, or expressing regret in half-finished sentences. The truth is, avoidants often struggle to express their emotions directly, so their attempts at closure may feel confusing or incomplete. But the important thing to recognize is that their return doesn't always mean they want to rebuild the relationship. Instead, it can be their way of coming to terms with what they lost, while also acknowledging the impact you had on them. In this sense, their regret becomes less about the future and more about honoring the past. What makes this significant is that closure from an avoidant often serves a dual purpose. For them, it helps reduce the discomfort of unresolved emotions. For you, it offers validation that you were always enough, even if they couldn't handle the intimacy at the time. Their return becomes proof that your love mattered, that your presence left a mark strong enough to pull them back even when they tried to walk away. This is where the shift happens. Instead of seeing their regret as a reason to reopen the door, you can choose to see it as confirmation of your value, and perhaps even as the closure you never thought you'd get. It's also worth noting that sometimes the universe allows people to circle back into our lives not so we can take them back, but so we can see the truth more clearly. When avoidants return out of regret, it gives you the chance to stand in your strength and recognize that their decision to leave was never about you not being good enough. It was about their inability to handle closeness at that time. That realization can be healing, because it reframes the narrative. You weren't abandoned because you lacked something, you were let go because they weren't ready to hold on. Their regret is a mirror reflecting back what they could not see before, and their return, whether brief or lasting, can be the closure that sets you free. When avoidants return out of regret, it can be tempting to hand over all the power to them, as if their decision to come back automatically determines what happens next. But the truth is, their regret may bring them back, yet the real control rests in your hands. You get to decide whether their presence deserves a place in your life again. This is an important shift to understand because when someone walks away, especially someone with avoidant tendencies, it can leave you questioning your worth, your role, and your value. Their return, however, is living proof that you mattered, that you were impactful, and that walking away was not the clean break they imagined it would be. But just because they come back doesn't mean you're obligated to accept them, forgive them, or start over where you left off. Their regret is their own to carry, but your choice is what determines the next chapter. For some, their return might feel like a second chance, an opportunity to rebuild with stronger boundaries and clearer communication. If growth has happened, if they've faced their fears of intimacy, and if you feel ready, then reconciliation could be possible. But reconciliation should never be built on regret alone. It needs to be rooted in mutual understanding, accountability, and a willingness to work through what once broke the connection. Without that, their return is just a repeat of the old cycle, destined to end the same way. For others, their return may serve a different purpose altogether. Sometimes their regret is the very closure you needed to recognize your own strength. It can validate that you were never the problem and allow you to move forward without carrying the weight of self-doubt. In this case, the power lies in saying no, in choosing not to reopen the door, and in walking forward with your head high. That decision is just as powerful, sometimes even more so, than choosing to let them back in. Because it shows that while they may regret leaving, you've grown to a place where you no longer need their presence to define your worth. What's most empowering about this truth is that it shifts the narrative. Their return doesn't place you in a passive position. It puts you in control. The story isn't about them realizing their mistake and swooping in to fix it. It's about you deciding what role, if any, they deserve in your life after the lessons you've learned and the healing you've done. Regret might pull them toward you, but wisdom allows you to set the boundaries that protect your peace. So, when avoidants come back, it's important to remember that the choice is no longer theirs to make. They had their chance when they walked away. Now it's about you. You get to decide whether their regret earns them a seat at your table again, or whether their return simply highlights how much stronger and wiser you've become without them. In the end, their regret is powerful, but your choice is what determines how the story truly ends. At the end of the day, what we learn from the cycle of avoidance leaving and returning is simple: regret may bring them back, but the power of what happens next belongs to you. Their absence doesn't define your worth, their regret doesn't determine your value, and their return doesn't dictate your future. You are the one who chooses whether their presence fits into your life again, or whether their return simply serves as proof that you were always enough. Thank you for allowing me to share these insights with you today, and thank you for your time, your energy, and your openness. It has been an honor to speak with you.